英語大丈夫ですか？
英語で喋ります。日本語は喋れないかったらあそこにトランスレーションが来ます。
はい。Okay, so today, this week, as you all would have read, I am doing Budo Kensho. There's three things that I want to cover today. The first being context of the Budo arts, the second being this idea of self-perfection, and then lastly, role modeling and what that kind of looks like, what that means for Budo. And there's three objectives that I hope to accomplish. The first one is to present the needed context to make sense of the Budo arts. The second one is to discuss the fundamental principles of Budo that are highlighted in the charter. And then I want to talk a little bit about the importance of setting a positive example, in other words, role modeling. So, the first section, the Budo arts. Lovely. How did Budo start? Obviously, it didn't come from nothing, so it's important to consider where it came from. And fundamentally, there is this idea of Bushido, that in the West, we definitely have some ideas about that are, let's say, less than accurate at times. And so I wanted to talk about two myths that seem to be very common in this space. There's a lot of things that could be said, but I think mentioning these two will be useful. First myth is that there was a singular, consistent moral code across all samurai and time periods. Essentially, what this means is that there's an idea that every samurai was holding themselves, to the exact same standards across time. But when we look at the history and the reality of what was occurring at the time, it doesn't seem to be the case. There was a very diverse set of ethical standards that were existing throughout different clans, different time periods, and different areas. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is that it was a uniquely distinct path, different from every other martial culture across the world, and it had some essence that was distinctly different. Unfortunately, while that is very romantic and a lovely idea, it doesn't seem to be the case that that would be the most accurate representation. When we look across cultures, we can see some parallels start to emerge. Although there definitely are important geopolitical and cultural differences that we can look at, there definitely is some meaningful parallels that we can start to draw when we try to move past that romanticism a little bit. However, then there starts the question, well, what is Budo? So Budo, fundamentally, to summarize, came out of Bushido. Bushido being this kind of idea of what warriors would do on the battlefield to be able to survive and fight for their kind of head person, let's say, whether that was a lord, whether that was the emperor. And Budo actually came about at a very interesting time when the Meiji Restoration was occurring. And so these martial ways emerged as a way to be able to maintain some of these traditions, but it stems into a deeper idea, I think, that is very personally interesting to me, which leads me on to the second point about self-perfection. And you'll see this is a very big idea throughout this presentation. As we see in the document that we've all read, practitioners attempt to do a few very important things that I think separates Budo from sports and from a lot of other things and practices that we might engage with, such as studying the skills that are trying to strive to unify mind, body, technique, to develop our character, to enhance our sense of morality, and to cultivate a respectful and courteous demeanor. And for me, I think there is no greater example of that than through my own practice of Kyudo. So I just wanted to very briefly touch on the 3 fundamental ethics of Kyudo as the way that I've come to practice and in the way that I've come to be taught about Kyudo. So for those who don't know, there is 3. There is first one, Shin. So this is truth. And to go back to the first slide, we can see these 3 ethics actually on the screen here. So Shin, Zen, Bi. Truth, goodness, and beauty. So just to talk about each of these very briefly, the way that I interpret truth in this context is to be mindful of the accuracy and the honesty with which we engage with the practice, with the things that we're doing. And so when we get some feedback or something that's maybe not very nice for our ego, to be able to align with that, I think is a very positive thing, is a very useful thing. And so then the second value, Zen, goodness, personally, I believe it's the function to which we are able to align with that truth that we see in Zen, that we see in Shin. And so when we start to see this process emerge of Shin, Zen, Bi, of this refinement, this very beautiful refinement that we can kind of continue to prioritize and value, I think it becomes very clear how this can tend towards a pursuit of self-perfection, an idea that we may very well never get to quote-unquote perfect, or this absolute idea of perfection, but the continued motion, the continued progress, I think is what makes these things so special. Now for the last section, role modeling. This is another part that I think is particularly important for Budo, because we are doing our best to represent our practices the best that we can. We're doing our best to hold ourselves to certain standards and to do things that are difficult but worth doing. It might not be necessary for our survival to practice Budo. It might not be necessary to have these kind of things in our lives, but to be able to be the best that we can be and to be able to be good role models for future generations and for people to be able to continue these practices, I think this is a very important thing to consider. So just to talk a little bit about the Budo Kensho, or the Budo Charter, there is actually 2, as you would have all seen, one general one and one for young people in particular. And so there's 2 quotes, one from each of these that I find to be particularly interesting. But first, this is a summary of each of those things. And I would like to throw a question out to the audience of which one for you, all are important, but which one for you do you think is the most interesting or important for your own practice of your own Budo?
About those articles or?
Yes, so which article do you think you personally relate the most to, and which part do you think is the most interesting for your own practice of Budo? Keiko? Why Keiko? That's okay.
日本語で話します。
稽古は results
Mhm.
are not important than 과정.
Mm-mm. That's right.
Process.
Mm.
I think.
The process is more important than the outcome.
Right.
No, I agree. I think that's a very, very good point. Rick, did you have one?
From all of these, I'm quite surprised that Article 5, teaching, is such an important one, because I feel if you're teaching people, you're as long as, because you're also always a student, so you're always kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Between teaching people who are lower than you, but you're being taught by those higher up. And so it kind of grounds you in a certain progression.
For sure.
And then helps you review your own knowledge.
No, it's a very good point. I totally agree. Oh, Oscar?
English.
English? Yeah, please English.
For me, it's 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
私には2と3です。
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if I practice and I go to competition, if I lose in competition, I know what I'm lacking of, so I can go back to 2 and restart.
Mm-hmm.
それ私にとって例えば試合に負けてなんか、どうして負けてまた稽古の練習に行ってもっと強くしたでまた試合その後繰り返しできます。So for me, 2 and 3 are like cycle for me. That will help me grow.
Great, awesome, thank you. Did you have one, Abdullah?
Yeah, mine is dojo.
Dojo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because main thing I love about the Japanese dojos, the atmosphere is just different than other dojos in the other countries. It's full of respect and at the same time competitiveness. Yeah, so that's what I love about dojos in Japan.
Great. So, as I mentioned briefly, there's 2 things that I personally think, for me, is the most interesting. I see the objective of Budo as, for me, the most interesting at points. And there are 2 quotes. The first quote is in the general one: "A trend towards infatuation just with technical ability compounded by an excessive concern with winning is a severe threat to the essence of Budo. To prevent any possible misinterpretation, practitioners of Budo must continually engage in self-examination and endeavor to perfect and preserve this traditional culture." And then a similar kind of idea is presented in the youth version, which goes on to say, "The student of Budo does not only focus on the lesser goals of technical skill or winning competitions, but strives to understand the true ideals of Budo and cherish its traditions." So my last point is, I suppose, just a reflection on the importance of role modeling. If we aren't able to be sufficiently good role models for the people that come after us or for the people that we are interacting with, then I think there is a lot of value left on the table, not only for the potential people that we might be interacting with, but also for ourselves. There is a certain kind of value and benefit to keeping in mind how we are engaging in the kind of practices that we are aligning ourselves with, that we are supporting. And so, while it might not seem very important to some people, I personally find it to be very important to my own practice. And I think there is a very this is a very useful part, especially of Budo, considering the aforementioned objectives and deeper ideals that Budo is trying to communicate that we might not see reflected in many other parts of life and parts of the world. So, with that, are there any questions? No questions? Yes? No? No? Well?
Do you think there's a sort of way of maybe creating a hierarchy of like which universities are kind of way more focused on like the winning sports aspect versus like sort of the values that are kind of independent of that? So kind of maybe try to find some correlation between whether it's a teaching technique, maybe it's just a technique, or maybe it's a focus just on that, you know?
So the question was, is it possible to find a hierarchy between the universities that more or less prioritize winning as compared to like the deeper, quote unquote, true ideals of Budo? Is that the question? I'm sure that if the study was done to kind of go and talk to each of these places and to kind of draw those lines between how different universities approach their particular practice. From what I understand, I'm no expert, but from what I understand, it does seem to be the case that winning competitions is the very primary objective of university Budo, which is a component of this kind of practice, is a component of Budo more broadly. However, I do feel like it would be unfortunate for that to be the only aim. And so, personally, again, I can't claim to any grand title, but I do think it becomes more like a sport when these deeper values are dismissed or when they're not remembered as often. And so I think that could be done. I think it could be interesting. Feel free to do it and let me know. And I'm sure that'd be a great discussion. But yeah, in general, I think it has its place, the winning, the competitive stuff, but when it becomes the primary focus, I think it detracts from this, the ideals that we have been shown and have been taught about Budo more broadly, whether that's Kyudo, Kendo, Judo, Shorinji Kempo, all of these things have a similar kind of ideals at their base, even if they might look and feel very different on a practical basis. So yes. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I will say first in Japanese. あなたはオーストラリアに給料やりましたね。で、日本語に来て。The question, second question.
Oh. Continue.
日本語に来て、で、オーストラリアと日本語の武道は、例えばオーストラリアの武道はなんか足りないですか？なんか日本語の弓道の武道とオーストラリアの武道は何が違うんですか？ So my question in English, you have been doing Kyudo in Australia and now you have been in Japan. What do you think about the Budo between Australia and Japan? Are they similar or Australia is lacking something or is something like doing differently?
I think it probably would be a better comparison if I was to have moved from my club in Australia to a regular club in Japan as compared to a university club, because obviously university clubs have a different set of incentives or goals that they have. For my club in Australia, a primary focus is trying to align with Shinzen-bi as best we can. And so from my current experience at university, it does seem that there is less of a focus of that being in Japan, but that's only, I believe, because I'm at a university. I'm sure once it gets further out, past university, then these things become cultivated again, because otherwise it becomes difficult to continue a practice, right? And so I feel like maybe there is a deeper understanding that I am not being able to see because it's subtle in the students here. However, from my own personal experience, I think there is a little bit of a difference, but I'm not sure if it would be so significant if it was from regular club to regular club, from Australia to Japan. I think the only main difference is because it's the university environment that primarily makes it different. I've got a couple of questions here as well, but please.
What do you think about the Budo character? They separate two characters, right? One is for general, one is for the young people. What do you think? Why they need to separate two?
Personally, I feel like it might make sense to simplify some of the ideas to then be able to make it more accessible in a way that the youth might not be able to appreciate. And so, as you saw from these two slides, it's very similar underlying ideas, right? But one is a little bit more refined in how it's communicating its idea, and the latter is a little bit more simple. So then it's easier for people that are just starting or at the beginning or, just coming off this competitive phase to start to appreciate. I haven't asked the people that wrote it, so I can't tell you what their intentions were or what their beliefs were on it, but that's what I would think it would be for that.
And in my point, because young people and the general different age have their different ability and their experience. So when the young people doing good, they will have their learning curve, and then for the general or adults, they have lot more experience, so they have the teaching and the promote. They need to do.
For sure. All right, now I will take these write-in questions that I have received. Okay, so this.
Read out loud the question.
The points you could not understand well. Where are the questions? Doko? Is it necessary?
Yes, this is the question, and this is all the question.
And this is a big question. I see. I'll start with the simple question first. So it says, I could not understand the part of externalizing the spirit of Budo in Article 3, or the Shiai, the competition. I think competition is about winning. Is it necessary to externalize the spirit of Budo? And that was by Sewon. So thank you very much for your question, Sewon. Personally, when it comes to competition, I feel like we have this idea in Kyudo, Seisha Sitshu, I think, where it says correct form is correct hitting, something like that. Don't quote me. But in my mind, I feel like competition is a great chance for us to be able to test our skills that we've gained and this kind of deeper calmness, I suppose, this capacity to be resilient in the face of stressful situations. It's an opportunity for us to be able to reflect on, everything that we've done and kind of not switch off our minds, but engage as best we can with that kind of mushin of like no mind or empty mind, insofar as we are just in the moment and we're just doing the thing in a stressful situation that kind of pushes us to our potential, to our limits, that in a regular training session might not stimulate. So there's definitely value for competitions in my mind, for this apparent externalizing in a broader competition space. But I think if there is no spirit that we're engaging with internally, we can't do much to push that out externally either. So that's why I think cultivating it internally first to then be able to engage with competition, I personally think is where the real value lies. Now we have a very long question that I will read out too. So, by Junte. So, the relationship between technical ability and the way. In the text it says that we should not just learn techniques, but also walk the quote-unquote way. But I found it difficult to understand exactly how learning techniques and walking the way are different. For example, I'm curious to know what it actually looks like to be technically skilled and also walking the way at the same time. I guess there's 3 questions here. So the first question, the relationship between technical ability and the way. So I suppose this is a similar thing in terms of the quotes that I brought up. If we just have technical skill, if we just have this, very sharp physical presence, but there isn't this deeper priority of cultivating our character, refining our morality, having this kind of deep personal development, then I think that time spent on that technical skill is unfortunately not worthless, not wasted, but much less valuable. Because then it's just in that domain. It's just for Kyudo, it's just for Kendo, it's just for whatever our thing is. And so having this deeper practice that helps to go across the rest of our lives, and to us as an individual, I think is truly where that idea of the way comes in. It's an approach that we take towards the rest of our lives as well, not just for this specific, almost arbitrary set of motions.
Can I
You have a
say
comment?
my opinion?
Sure.
For example, in Kendo, in Europe and also in Japan, people that go to Shiai, after they are done with the Shiai, like they are done with the Shiai, for example, in university, and people are going to Shiai, and after that, you need to go for exams like Koran, Rokudan, and so on.
Yeah.
And I heard, don't quote me, that half of the Japanese people and European people are stopping doing the martial arts because they are just focusing on the competition. They are not thinking about the Budo. They think just winning is everything. And then when the Shia is over and then you need to have Koran and Rokudan exam, they are just, I can't do this anymore. They
Yeah.
quit.
Yeah.
So from my experience, it's easy to do it correctly, and I also like focus the Shiai. I try to do it correct way, the correct posture, and also in the Kikentaichi in Finland, Shinsen B is one of our motto. So I think for you, or people that are like thinking about the Shiai, do you want to do this Shiai because you only think about the Shiai and then you quit the martial art, or do you want to continue Budo martial arts after the competition?
I think
Because it's like sorry.
No, go
it's
on.
like because you need to change your way. If you're only like focusing getting target, but you are not doing the posture, and then you are done with the competition, and then you need to have correct posture. People are that, and they must.
The example that comes to mind for me is that ultimately, for Kyudo, if we just focus on the competition aspect, then ultimately all we're doing is making holes in an arbitrarily sized paper target. And if there is no deeper appreciation, no deeper practice, then it seems to kind of be wasted a little bit in that way. And it's hard to keep up over a long period of time because then it just becomes another arbitrary practice or sport that we could just interchange without much care or consideration. So, thank you for that. Now, for the next one, the specific meaning of an international perspective. It was mentioned that people who promote martial arts should have an international perspective, but it was difficult to understand what this actually means. For example, I think it would have been easier to understand if there had been more concrete explanation of whether this means teaching methods that take cultural differences into account, or a mindset when teaching martial arts overseas. So the way that I interpret international perspective is it's not a single culture's, necessarily a single culture's view or a single country's view, but something deeper that can be spread throughout all countries, essentially. And so in a similar kind of way as, the last question of technical ability and the way, I feel like there is a thread of deeper consideration and a idea of this very narrow path that only a single country is able to be the arbiter for, or to be the decision maker of. And so an international perspective, for me, means to be open to different countries, different perspectives, different views, but also prioritize things that are sufficiently deep so that they can translate across cultures, across countries a little bit more. There's obviously such a long... I'm trying to keep these replies short because we are running out of time a little bit, but there's definitely a much broader and longer conversation with respect to that. Now, for the last one, the importance and limitations of competition. It says that you should give your all in a match, but you shouldn't be too concerned about winning or losing. I wanted to know more about the ultimate purpose of a match. I'm wondering whether a match is simply a place to check your skills, or whether it's a place to train your character. Also, I'm still inexperienced. I don't really understand what it feels like to have a mind that isn't concerned with winning or losing, and I felt like I wanted to understand it better. Well, thankfully, we already briefly touched on that. Again, I really do feel like it's great to win. It feels lovely. It's good to be able to share in this delight with other team members and with the rest of our club. But if we aren't using it as an opportunity to train our character, I feel like it's again, not an entirely wasted opportunity, because I'm sure there are some benefits that we can kind of take from that. But it does seem to be the case that if we didn't want this to be training of our character, then we wouldn't really need to do Budo to be able to attain those things. The beauty of Budo, in my mind, is the Budo Kensho, is the Budo Charter, is this kind of different approach than we might see in international sports and other kind of practices that are engaged with for other reasons, let's say. So yes, I know I've taken up more than enough of your time, but we've got one more question. Okay.
I want to add for the winning and losing. For example, in kendo, if you're thinking your opponent, makemas, kachimasu, you're hesitate. And I think judo is same. If you think your opponent, then if you just bam.
Yeah, hesitation is definitely not the most helpful thing. Whether it's in kendo or kyudo or judo or shorinji kenpo, having that certainty of mind and that capacity for decisive action, I think, is definitely something that Budo has helped me to try to cultivate. I'm still, myself quite inexperienced, and I have a long way to go and a lot to learn, but I do think this is a good practice, or a good set of practices, a good set of ways to be able to interface with that. So, if there's no more questions, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. Okay, I don't know how long that went for. Oh, half an hour!